Let me show you something worth noticing. You know what's happening, and you still do it. You see the pattern forming. You recognize the feeling before you click. You've been here before, maybe a dozen times, and yet the outcome surprises you every single time, like it's the first. That's not stupidity. That's not ignorance. That's something else entirely. I watch someone I know, someone sharp, someone who reads constantly and thinks deeply about the world, buy the same kind of investment 3 separate times. Each time it collapsed. Each time they were shocked. Each time they said they'd learned their lesson. And each time, about 18 months later, when the memory had faded just enough, they did it again. Different company, different story, same structure, same ending. The fascinating part wasn't the loss. The fascinating part was watching them explain it each time as if it were completely unrelated to what came before, as if the universe had simply rolled the dice against them 3 times in a row, as if there were no thread connecting these events except bad luck. This is what I want you to see. Smart people don't keep making the same money mistakes because they're not smart enough. They make them because intelligence doesn't protect you from the thing that's actually causing the problem. Think about the last financial decision you regretted, not the outcome, the decision itself, the moment before you committed. What were you feeling? Not thinking, feeling. There was probably a sensation in your chest or your stomach, maybe excitement, maybe anxiety, maybe both at once, maybe a kind of urgency, like you had to move now or miss something important. That feeling has a job. It's trying to tell you something. But here's what almost no one realizes. The feeling isn't giving you information about the decision in front of you. It's giving you information about your nervous system's current state. And your nervous system doesn't know anything about money. Your body is running software that was written for a completely different world. A world where the most important thing was whether that sound in the bushes was wind or a predator, whether that person approaching was friend or threat, whether you had enough food stored for winter or whether you needed to act immediately to secure resources before someone else did. None of that software got updated when we invented currency. None of it got patched when we created investment accounts or credit scores or compound interest. Your body is still running the original code, trying to keep you safe in an environment it doesn't recognize. So when you feel that urgency to buy something, that's not market analysis. That's your system detecting scarcity and trying to make you act before the opportunity disappears. When you feel resistance to selling an investment that's losing money, that's not strategy. That's your system trying to avoid the pain of admitting a loss, because in the ancestral environment, losing resources often meant not surviving. The smartest person you know is making decisions with a nervous system that can't tell the difference between a declining stock price and a physical threat. And the thing about threats is, you don't think your way through them. You react. Fast. Automatically. With patterns that worked 10,000 years ago. I know someone who spent 2 years researching financial independence. Read every major book. Understood the math perfectly. Could explain compound interest and safe withdrawal rates better than most financial advisors. Then, in a single afternoon, during a moment of stress about something completely unrelated to money, made a decision that erased 18 months of progress. Bought something they didn't need with money they didn't have to solve a feeling that had nothing to do with the purchase. When I asked them about it later, they were as confused as I was. They knew better. They had literally written articles about this exact mistake. But in that moment, none of that knowledge was accessible. The feeling was too loud, and the feeling always wins when it gets loud enough, because the feeling is faster and older and more convinced it's saving your life. This is why knowing what to do doesn't translate into doing it. This is why you can understand something completely and still watch yourself do the opposite. The understanding lives in one part of you. The decision gets made in another part, and those two parts don't always communicate. You probably notice this in other areas. You know you should go to sleep, but you keep scrolling. You know you should have the difficult conversation, but you keep putting it off. You know you should start the project, but you keep finding other things that suddenly seem urgent. Same mechanism, different context. With money, the stakes just happen to be more visible. You can ignore the sleep deprivation, you can defer the conversation, but the bank account doesn't let you pretend. The numbers don't care about your intentions. They just reflect what actually happened. So you get this strange phenomenon where very intelligent people are completely mystified by their own behavior. They can see the pattern in others. They can predict it, diagnose it, explain it. But when it's their turn, when they're in the situation, the pattern becomes invisible. Because you can't see the pattern from inside the feeling that creates it. Here's what makes it worse. Every time you make the same mistake, you add evidence to a story you're probably telling yourself. The story that you're bad with money, or that you don't have discipline, or that there's something wrong with you. And that story becomes another feeling, shame usually, or frustration, or resignation. And now you're making decisions while carrying that feeling too. So it's not just your nervous system reacting to perceived scarcity or threat. It's your nervous system reacting to perceived scarcity or threat while also trying to manage the discomfort of feeling like you're failing at something you think you should be able to handle. The decisions don't get better. They get more complicated. I've watched people make objectively terrible financial choices not because they didn't know better, but because making the smart choice would have required them to admit they'd been wrong about something. And admitting they were wrong would have triggered a feeling they'd spent years learning to avoid. So they chose the bad option because it let them avoid the feeling. And then they were confused about why they kept ending up in the same place. The pattern isn't in the decisions. The pattern is in what you're trying not to feel when you make them. Someone once told me they kept buying things they didn't need because it made them feel successful. Not because they thought buying things meant they were successful. They understood that was irrational. But the act of purchasing created a brief sensation that felt like what they imagined success would feel like. And that sensation was so satisfying that it overrode everything they knew about money. They weren't confused about financial principles. They were trying to manufacture an emotional state that their actual life circumstances weren't providing. The purchases failed every time, but the hope that this time it would work never quite died. So the cycle continued. This is where most advice fails completely, because most advice is given to the part of you that understands things, the part that can learn and plan and remember. But that's not the part making the decisions in the critical moment. The decisions are being made by the part that feels things, and that part doesn't care about advice. It cares about not feeling bad right now. So you end up with this strange split. One part of you knows exactly what to do, can articulate it perfectly. The other part does something else entirely. And then the first part looks at what the second part did and can't figure out how it happened. You're not broken. Your system is working exactly as designed. It's just designed for a different problem than the one you're trying to solve. Here's what changes things. Not advice, not more information, not trying harder, but starting to notice the moment before the decision. Not to stop yourself or control yourself or fix yourself. Just to notice, to catch the feeling before it turns into action. What does the urge to buy something actually feel like in your body? Not the thought that justifies it, the sensation that precedes the thought. Where do you feel it? What's the quality of it? If you had to describe it without using any words related to money or purchasing, what would you say? Most people have never asked themselves this question. They've been having the same feeling for years, maybe decades, and they've never actually examined what it is. They just know that when it shows up, they do the thing, and then they deal with the consequences later. The noticing doesn't make the feeling go away. That's not the point. The point is that when you can feel the feeling instead of just reacting to it, you create space, just a second or two. But in that space, something different becomes possible. Not because you're controlling yourself, but because once you can feel the mechanism, it starts to lose its automatic quality. It's still there. You still feel it, but it's no longer the only thing you can feel. And once it's not the only thing you can feel, it's no longer the only thing that can guide your choice. I know someone who realized they spent money every time they felt lonely, not because buying things solved loneliness, but because the process of shopping, the browsing and comparing and imagining, created a kind of companionship, a sense that someone somewhere was thinking about them, even if that someone was an algorithm trying to sell them something. Once they saw that, really saw it, they didn't stop feeling lonely. They didn't suddenly develop better spending habits through willpower, but they started to notice the loneliness before it turned into browsing. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, they'd feel the loneliness and just let it be there. And it would pass, not immediately, but it would pass. And the spending slowed down, not because they were trying to spend less, but because they were trying less hard to make the loneliness go away. And it turned out that the spending was never really about the things anyway. It was about the feeling, and once you stop using money to manage feelings, you stop making the same mistakes, not because you've learned the right answers, but because you're finally addressing the actual question. The same money mistake, repeated over and over, is never really about money. It's about what you're trying to make money do, what you're asking it to solve, what feeling you're hoping it will create or eliminate. And until you see that clearly, until you can feel it operating in real time, you'll keep being surprised by your own behavior. Because the behavior isn't irrational. It's just rational in service of a goal you didn't know you had. Smart people make the same money mistakes because being smart doesn't make you immune to being human. And being human means you're running on systems that don't care about your financial goals. They care about whether you feel safe, whether you feel adequate, whether you feel in control. And they'll sacrifice any long-term goal to manage those feelings in the moment, not because you're weak, because that's how the system works. And the system is older and faster and more powerful than any amount of knowledge you can acquire. The way through isn't more knowledge. It's learning to feel what's actually driving you, and then slowly, carefully, learning to make decisions from a different place, not a smarter place, a more aware one. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next.